Hey, my name is Alex Huneycutt, and welcome to my channel where I help you guys learn how to become more effective artists. Today, we're going to be doing something a little bit different from my previous videos and just going over a workout of a plein air painting. As some of you may know, it is Plein April. I think that's a funny name. Other alternatives were Landscaperil, but that one didn't catch on, so, nothing to do about that. But in this video, we're simply going over process tips, how I work for a how I work for a painting, and how I now am able to get a plein air painting done in usually an hour or less. For the month of April, I'll still be uploading a few of these because I'll be doing more of them day to day. And I hope you guys find this useful. So if we talk about process, let's just go ahead and jump right into it. I like to start off with simple line drawings. Since this is just drawing from reference, there's no crazy construction or things from imagination that I have to do. This is purely an exercise on color and light for me. But you can start with a line drawing so that you can get in your general proportions. You can see here I keep it very loose. I'm just roughing in the loose shapes of the foliage here, dialing in where I want the door to be in comparison to the reference. None of it has to be detailed. Because you'll see going forward, the next step that I'm going to do is I'm going to mass in all of my major shapes. I'm comfortable enough now that I wouldn't start this out with value. Also, since it's from reference, you don't really need to anyway. It's more about guessing your color sense. And my favorite way to approach that is to use the lasso tool. It's dirty, I know, but I almost never paint by actually using a brush. It's basically color by numbers. I make my shapes, I fill them in. So you can see here I'm going in for a general wash tone on the background. And using this brush that I like, it's got some color dynamics sets, so I found a new kind of a mix to keep the liveliness going. Is I will make my shape with the lasso tool, and I'll push my brush up really high and make a bunch of strokes with it. It's got enough color variation that when I do go in, I can add a lot of this nuance that makes it look like I have detail very quickly. I should mention this time lapse is sped up 2 times over, so it's only twice as fast as I did it originally. It took me about 65 minutes, and looks like here we've got it sped up so that it's 30 or so. There we go, putting in my door. And I pull out a rake brush. This is all the rage now, guys. If you look at some of your favorite Insta artists, everyone's raking. Everyone's raking up stuff, man. I don't know, it's like, where are the leaves? I'll quit it with the comedy, I'm not best at it. But yeah, for me, getting in quick detail on stuff like this is knowing how to use custom brushes to your advantage. You see me use a rake brush there when I'm trying to put these windows in. That's because I wanted to get some general variation on the wood grain before going over and adding the light color. So here I've picked my light color. It looks like a very intense saturated orange, and I use this kind of oil brush where every stamp of the brush mark has slight color variation to it. So you get that really nice stroking effect in there. Really adds a lot of life instead of just a flat color. So my approach when having these shapes, to save on layers and time, I don't want to have to start with like in the case of the windows, I wouldn't paint the windows orange color first and then frame it. You saw me work from the outside in, so the frame was dark. I started with that, then I put the orange color in it. Same with this, dry erase board on the front. I did the brown color of the grain, then did a second shape inside of it that was the dark color. These are small little tips that help me work faster, but instead of having to trace around a shape, you just make a mass inside of it. Works a lot faster that way. I'm going over this overhang, lassoing in my shapes for where the pattern of white would go. And real quick, I'm going to clip into it, so in case I mess up or I want to do something, I can change it pretty easily. This video will primarily be me talking over this in my process, so feel free to paint along with me. If it's going too fast, because not even I work this fast, it took me twice as long to do this as the video is showing. Feel free to slow it down, mute the video because I'll sound like a drunk. And follow along. A lot of these techniques that you'll see in the video I've picked up from some of my classes at Brainstorm. The one that I'm showing right now was an awesome tip that I picked up from my most recent instructor, Kenny Vo. Just love that man, he's amazing. And he paints in what he calls assets and textures. So we've got these wooden planks on the side of the building. I want to quickly get that in without having to individually paint each line, and I want a lot of visual noise, high density. So I'm going to paint these 3 individual planks in the color of the building, and I'm going to arrange them in a way that's fairly close to the pattern on the reference image. Once I do that, I can duplicate them. You can flip them, you can change the order around, you can paint slight variations so that the pattern isn't so isn't so noticeable. And you'll see me do that in a bit. I take only 1 plank that time so I can try to break up the pattern. Then double that. Just like that, really quickly, you have a lot of wood planks with a lot of visual noise that's relatively unique plank to plank, and I didn't have to try very hard. So here I'm going to go in and paint away some of that noticeable sameness from copying. Add some color variation, paint away some of the denseness. Duplicate it so I have a safe version, and also make it taller. And what I did here is I took the base flat color that I had underneath and I darkened it. So since the way I arranged my planks, they had gaps in them that was transparent, the darker layer underneath instantly makes those black lines for you, so you don't have to paint them in. So I clipped in my wood grain into the layer, and boom, I've got a house texture. Now I'm going about and I'm filling in major masses around the building in the general hue that I see. I see some nice purples and kind of warm tones on the side. This is where a lot of the kind of the artistic interpretation comes if you're just doing things from reference. I'm not yet comfortable with making like really out there shape decisions or caricaturizing a building, but I do like to push and create stronger color contrast and harmony. So if I feel like I see the hint of a certain color somewhere, I will purposefully go and move it that direction in my own piece. You can see me here duplicating my wood grain, using that to my advantage. And I'm going to warp it into perspective with the distort tool in Procreate, so that I instantly have those wood planks that are in reference. From there, it's just a matter of using your color balance tool so that you can darken it, desaturate it, however you need to match the layer underneath. When you're trying to work quickly like this, it's really all about major shapes, large blockouts. You want to find the biggest things that you can paint in first before ever worrying about detail. And in a way, by me using these textures, I'm not painting detail. I'm still working in a very outside-in mindset from large to small, because I didn't have to really zoom in, worry about individual details. I'm still basically coloring in major shapes, but they have detail built in. And that's a really powerful way to start thinking about paintings that you do. It'll speed you up. In a way, you're building a toolkit of patterns that you can paint with instead of painting detail. So I reuse that same asset all over the place. It's not cheap if it gets the job done, and it's very effective. You can see how I'm thinking in major shapes still with what I did just now. I saw a large dark space, and instead of making, it looks like maybe 3 dark areas on the left, I made 1, and then I'm going to put in the brighter color later. Alright, so this is a great brush that I use all of the time. I have an Ambient Occlusion brush. I think I picked it up from Jing Sketch, and you can look him up on Gumroad or Patreon. Hopefully I'll remember to link it in the description, but he's got a free brush pack that has this built in, and one edge is hard while the other edge is soft. Of course, I say that, but in this, I'm actually just using the lasso tool still and using a dirty airbrush and painting in ambient occlusion, soft shadows. So with this, I have a multiply layer on top, and I'm picking a relatively warm tone because I think the light sources of the ambient light, not the actual glowing orange. I think the ambient light is more of a cool temperature, and in relation the shadows will kind of be warm, so I've got this orange-ish light tone that I'm putting on multiply. So I'm going in, getting those new shapes in. There again is another good example with that more horizontal one. I did the shape of the rim first in the lighter color, then went in and filled the dark spots, and it took much less time. I'm adjusting the value of the shadows to more closely match and give better depth to the reference. The foliage in this is really nice, but it's admittedly a weak point for me. There's this nice Ghibli brush pack that I found on Gumroad, and it has a bunch of different kinds of brush shapes. The best tip that I can give for foliage is I've seen people rough in a gestural shape with their lasso, and then get the texture in with a foliage brush. Quickly lets you get in detail. Once you have that, it's not very foliage-y, it's not very plant-like, so you can go in and break the silhouette once you're finished. You'll see me do that in a bit, but first I'm going to work on all of the plants. Generally, the best approach I have to share so far is to have the darkest shadow colors and then work your way up in exposure. Plants, trees, grass, they're all often more yellow than you think, and I'm playing up the blue tones of them here because I think it works with the palette. But typically you have to be pretty careful. It's like, you see, like they've come off feeling kind of blue in this, but even still I have it almost in the yellow range. And just because of the way color works and plays tricks on your eyes, you don't really tell. But what I was saying is that really neon-ish greens, when you get firmly into the green range, almost and further towards cyan, it looks really unnatural and kind of nuclear feeling. Neon colors, danger, warning signs. So to get more of that natural vibe, you definitely should lean towards more of the warmish zone. Alright, so I alpha locked or locked the transparency for Photoshop users, and I'm going in and adding extra darks where I feel I missed them. And now is where I begin breaking the silhouette so it feels like it wasn't a singular shape and instead is more actually like leaves. These are the sorts of things where specialty brushes really come in handy. If you don't have any, I'd recommend collecting them. I don't know if I should be sharing some. I think some of them I have or many of them I have are freely shared or shared from other users who didn't care about paying money for them. The Ghibli brushes I did spend money on. You can see there I tried moving towards the blue because I keep feeling like I see it in my palette, and I immediately reversed that decision. It just looked wrong. So I'm finally tackling that wood plank box, and you'll see me stretch it out, and then I'm going to use the same asset just select where I know it's there and then distort it into perspective so that I can keep the scaling correct. So now that looks like it's on a different plane, while the one facing towards us is uncompressed, I guess. Notice again how I darkened the color underneath so that I have those dark lines without having to draw them. Some other brushes that I'm using are Art of Ian's brushes. He works in Procreate a lot, and he has some wonderful naturalistic type brushes with tons of color variation built in. He sets up his brushes so that he can work very quickly, lots of shape variation, lots of organic variation as well. But no way around this, just gotta paint in the branches. One thing I hope you guys notice, and it took me a long time to get comfortable with, is to always change your brush size. If you're not changing that around, you're going to end up with very similar looking brush strokes. So I often end up in a very large range where I'm using a brush to get texture, or I'm in the small range and constantly switching between different small sizes for that variation. There I go, just raking in texture. So here I went in the layer behind my trees, and I'm throwing in the light sources that I see in the image. Procreate has a bloom feature built in so that you don't have to do any layer gymnastics. I can just push the bloom effect, adjust some settings, which unfortunately I'm zoomed in because of the iPad's aspect ratio. I'm zoomed in so you can't see what settings I'm changing, but essentially there is a burn strength, which controls how quickly it overexposes into white, and a radial size, and which determines how much it blooms. So I kept those both pretty low so that I could maintain the yellowish tone and just get some nice glow. I missed it in my time-lapse. I don't know if I'm using overlay or color dodge on this layer mode, but I am now massing in general light bloom. When you do this, you want to keep in mind the color of the light sources themselves, rather than the color of what you see in the reference. So I know that it's a very warm light source, and I then go and use overlay or color dodge or soft light. Any of those are all good layers. Color dodge is the strongest. And with a warm light source, you can then trend the local colors of things underneath towards the color that you're using as your light. And since it's a warm orangey color of light, that's what I used. Okay, so in overlay blend mode, what am I going to do? I'm adding more of the light spread with that orangey tone, but you see me here choosing to go blue, and that's because I wanted to add cool tones to help contrast and push the light color around the door. Doing this gives you some temperature shift and really helps push the contrast of your focal area. Orange and blue are complementary colors. You see them on posters and movie designs all of the time. They vibrate against each other in a really pleasing way. When you keep things on layers like this, so I have all of my shadows on one single multiply layer on top of everything. So I use my lasso tool to get in particular shapes. But if I needed to adjust that shape or adjust the hue of the shadows going forward, I can just select that shadow shape that I painted in and adjust it, like you saw earlier, where I stretched the size of it to better match for reference. Here I'm catching some more small details so that I can fill in that blank spot. There were a lot of cables over here that I totally missed. This is a hot tip for urban areas anyway. It doesn't matter if it makes sense. You can see Nikolai Lokertson do this all the time in his paintovers. He'll just paint cables everywhere for detail and intricacy, and it really helps a lot. You don't have to do too much to them. You can often treat them just as silhouettes. There's this overhanging object that I wanted to make sure I didn't miss. And since I'm working quickly, I didn't go and dig through for my multiply shadow layer. I just assumed the general shadow color that I wanted and airbrushed it in. Who needs layer management, especially when you're working quickly? So at this stage, I'm going in normal layers on top of a lot of things and just adding in details that I need. I don't need to be fiddling around with layers holding me back, and so instead I'm just going in and using color, directly painting at this point. So here's another hot tip. You can duplicate a surface and lower its brightness. Then if you mask it so that it's invisible and invert that mask, well, sorry. Let's say you mask it, invert it so that it goes invisible. You then have to use white to reveal what you masked away. If you use a texture brush, you can then easily distress and add texture to something, which is what I'm doing here. Got some gravelly, dirty, chalky brushes and can add a lot of wear and tear this way. Once I was done, I just combined it together because I knew that that's what I wanted. I'm doing the same thing to these potted plants, lowering the brightness, or duplicating, lowering the brightness, inverting the mask, and adding distress. I'm getting to a happy point with the image where I want to call it done, so I start adding finishing touches, which are generally just pushing mood and focal area on a darken layer, which helps get rid of details because it pulls everything down to the darkest color that you're painting with. I make a vignette in certain areas, and then I'll typically go with an overlay layer, which you see here, and I start adding in large swashes of mood light, mood color. Since I identified the light source to be coolish, that's what you see me doing here. I'm adding a coolish light. And I'm going back to my multiply layer, the darker colors. And I'm adding in some shadows that I missed that would really help with the believability. Here I'm using the Ambient Occlusion brush that I was talking about earlier. I use it all the time. One edge is hard, one edge is soft, so when you paint along something, you can have it gradate softly outwards. And I'll do that either at the end or really early on, depending on the piece, where I will just go over everything that is making contact or is overhanging something, and I add ambient soft shadows. It really does a lot to push the depth forward, especially with a flat scene like this. It's all about accurate lighting or just shadows to push depth. Otherwise, it's very flat. And you can just click to the beginning of this video where I hadn't done all my lighting and shadows yet, and you can see the difference in how things pop out. So I'm getting some soft shadows underneath the plants, making sure that they feel like they're part of the environment. It's pretty crazy. You don't really think about it, especially as you're painting, because you just think, oh yeah, that's where it is, that's what it does, that's where it goes. But the moment you add shadows where there weren't before, you think, huh, how did I miss that and why did I ignore it? I just went behind my plants and made a cheap layer real quick to get in a dark shape that I missed. And now I'm finally working on small details, writing in with a chalky brush onto this dry erase board. It doesn't matter, I'm just... At first I thought I'd copy it, but that was just a waste of time, so just general things that you'd see at a coffee shop. And scribbles, too. It's something that we often confuse early on, but it's really powerful to think about, is if you have all of your big shapes in with good lights, good shadows, so that things feel like they're a part of the scene, everything looks complete with overall silhouette. The details don't matter as much. Here I'm going to do finishing touches by exporting my image, putting it on top, and then going in with basically After Effects. I'm going to push the levels, maybe shift the color balance around, and then eventually sharpen it and add some noise just so that it has some grain. But yeah, before I finish up the video, just going back to that previous point, try not to focus on detail. Get in your major shapes. The silhouettes are what define the clarity and the overall finish of your piece. If the shapes look like they were thought out or they're clean and they're not messy, the image will look complete with accurate lighting. Then small details don't have to be bothered with, essentially. It's just a matter of putting them in, and they can be relatively abstract like you see on the signs, they're just extra touches. Alright, so thank you for painting along with me today, guys. I'll have several more of these coming out. I'll probably do some talks reviewing my experiences with the Brainstorm school classes that I've done, as well as other general talks about art school in general, my thoughts on Plein Pro, and other things. If you're interested in talking with me or following along, you can join my Discord with the link in the description. got a really good core group of people who are very social, very happy to help in it. Okay, thanks guys.